Marcus Wellington had served the royal family for 15 years. His tall frame and sharp eyes made him the perfect royal guard. Every morning he would stand outside Buckingham Palace watching people come and go. His uniform was always clean, his boots always shined. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Marcus arrived at 6 in the morning, just as the sun was rising over London. He took his position near the main entrance, standing perfectly still like a statue. Tourists often tried to make him smile or move, but Marcus never broke his serious expression. Around 10 in the morning, a group of young people approached the palace gates. They were new recruits for the Royal Guard training program. Marcus recognized their instructor, Sergeant Thompson, who had trained Marcus years ago. The recruits looked nervous and excited at the same time. The group stopped near Marcus's post. Sergeant Thompson began explaining the duties of a Royal Guard. "See that man there?" He pointed at Marcus. "He has been standing there for hours without moving a muscle. This is what dedication looks like." The recruits stared at Marcus with wide eyes. One young man whispered to his friend, "I could never stand that still for so long." Another recruit, a woman with short blonde hair, seemed impressed by Marcus's discipline. Marcus could hear everything they said, but he kept his eyes straight ahead. He was used to being talked about. Over the years, many people had commented on his ability to remain motionless for hours. It was part of his training, part of his duty. Sergeant Thompson continued his lesson. Royal Guards must be ready for anything. They protect not just the building, but everyone inside. They are the first line of defense. The recruits nodded seriously, understanding the weight of the responsibility. As the group prepared to move on, Marcus noticed something unusual. More recruits were arriving from different directions. Soon, there were about 30 young people surrounding his position. They formed a circle around him, all staring and whispering among themselves. Marcus felt uncomfortable for the first time in years. He was trained to handle threats, but this was different. These were not enemies, just curious young people. However, their presence was making his job difficult. He could not see past them to monitor the area properly. The recruits began asking Sergeant Thompson questions about Marcus. How long can he stand there? Does he ever get tired? What happens if someone tries to attack? Their voices grew louder as more people joined the crowd. Marcus started to feel trapped. His training told him to stay in position, but his instincts warned him that something was wrong. The situation was becoming chaotic. Other tourists began to notice the crowd and came closer to see what was happening. Within minutes, Marcus found himself at the center of a growing crowd. The recruits had accidentally created a spectacle. People were taking photos, pointing and talking loudly. The peaceful morning had turned into a circus. Marcus knew he had to do something, but he could not abandon his post without permission. He tried to catch Sergeant Thompson's attention with his eyes, but the instructor was busy answering questions from eager recruits. The crowd grew larger and more excited. Some tourists began making jokes, trying to get Marcus to react. Children were running around, and their parents were struggling to control them. The situation was spinning out of control. Marcus felt sweat forming on his forehead despite the cool morning air. His years of training had prepared him for many situations, but not this one. He was supposed to protect the palace, but he could not even protect himself from an overly enthusiastic crowd of future guards. Just when Marcus thought the situation could not get worse, he heard a commotion near the palace entrance. Someone important was approaching and the crowd was blocking the way. Marcus realized that his position, meant to provide security, had become a security problem itself. The irony was not lost on him. The very people who were supposed to learn about royal protection were creating a situation that required royal protection. Marcus closed his eyes for a brief moment, gathering his strength and preparing for whatever would happen next. He could hear Sergeant Thompson trying to control the recruits, but their excitement was too much. They had never seen a real royal guard up close, and their curiosity had gotten the better of them. Marcus remained still, hoping that someone would restore order soon. The morning sun was getting higher, and the crowd showed no signs of dispersing. Marcus realized that this was going to be a very long day, unlike any he had experienced in his 15 years of service. The crowd around Marcus continued to grow. What started as 30 recruits had now become nearly 100 people. Tourists from all over the world joined the gathering, thinking something special was happening at the palace. Children pressed closer, trying to touch Marcus's uniform, while their parents took endless photos. Marcus felt his breathing becoming heavier. The circle of people was getting tighter around him. Some recruits had sat down on the ground to get a better view, while others stood on their toes, craning their necks to see over the crowd. The noise level was rising steadily. "Look at his eyes," one recruit said loudly. "They never blink." Another added, "I bet he's like a robot." The comments made Marcus want to move, to show them he was human, but his training kept him frozen in place. Sergeant Thompson was now shouting over the crowd, trying to get his recruits to form a proper line and move away. "Everyone back up. Give the guard some space." But his voice was drowned out by the excited chatter of tourists and the persistent questions from recruits. A small child managed to slip through the crowd and ran up to Marcus. The boy tugged on Marcus's uniform pants, looking up at him with innocent eyes. "Mister, are you a statue?" the child asked loudly. The crowd laughed, and more children broke free from their parents to get closer to Marcus. Marcus felt panic rising in his chest. He was trained to handle dangerous criminals, not curious children. His job was to protect the royal family, but he could not even protect himself from this growing mob of well-meaning people. The situation became worse when a news reporter arrived. She had heard about the unusual gathering at the palace and came with a camera crew. "This is Sarah Mitchell reporting live from Buckingham Palace, where a crowd has gathered around a royal guard," she announced to her camera. The presence of the news crew made everyone more excited. People began waving at the camera and calling out comments. Some tourists started performing for the news, making the scene even more chaotic. Marcus realized that this innocent training session had turned into a media event. From the corner of his eye, Marcus could see palace security approaching. 2 officers were pushing through the crowd, trying to reach him. He felt a moment of relief, thinking help was finally coming. But the security officers were having trouble getting through the thick crowd. The recruits, meanwhile, were asking Sergeant Thompson more questions. "Why doesn't he move? Is he allowed to talk? What if someone attacks him right now?" Each question made the crowd more curious and more determined to stay and watch. Marcus noticed that some people in the crowd were getting impatient. A few tourists complained that they could not get good photos because of all the people. Someone in the back shouted, "We can't see anything." This caused some pushing as people tried to get better positions. The peaceful morning had turned into a chaotic scene. Marcus could smell the different perfumes and colognes of the crowd mixed with the exhaust from cars, stopping to see what was happening. The sounds of car horns joined the noise of the crowd as traffic began to back up. A group of teenage tourists decided to test Marcus's resolve. They started making funny faces at him, jumping up and down and even trying to balance books on their heads to make him laugh. Their friends cheered them on, creating even more noise and distraction. Marcus felt sweat dripping down his back inside his uniform. The warm bodies pressing around him made the air feel thick and stuffy. He wanted to take a deep breath, but he knew that even the smallest movement would be noticed by 100 pairs of watching eyes. The news reporter was now interviewing some of the recruits. "What do you think about this Royal Guard's dedication?" she asked a young woman. "It's amazing," the recruit replied. "I don't think I could ever be that still. He's like a superhero." Marcus almost smiled at being called a superhero, but he caught himself just in time. The irony was that he felt anything but heroic at that moment. He felt trapped, overwhelmed, and increasingly worried about how this situation would end. Palace security was still trying to disperse the crowd, but their efforts were not working. Every time they moved some people away from one side, more people filled in the space from another direction. It was like trying to empty the ocean with a bucket. Marcus began to realize that this situation was beyond normal crowd control. He needed help from someone with real authority, someone the crowd would listen to and respect. But he could not call for help without breaking his stance, and breaking his stance was not an option for a royal guard. The morning sun was now high in the sky, beating down on Marcus and the crowd. He could feel the heat building up inside his heavy uniform, and he wondered how much longer he could maintain his position under these circumstances. The situation at the palace gates was reaching a breaking point. Marcus could feel his legs beginning to shake slightly from standing in the same position for so long. While surrounded by the pressing crowd, the noise had become almost unbearable, with people talking, laughing, and shouting all around him. A group of street performers had noticed the crowd and decided to set up nearby, thinking it was a good opportunity to make some money. They began juggling and playing music, which attracted even more people to the area. Soon, what had started as a training session had become an impromptu festival. Marcus watched helplessly as vendors appeared, selling drinks and snacks to the crowd. Someone had even brought a small folding chair and was charging people money to stand on it for better photos of the trapped guard. The whole situation had spiraled completely out of control. The news reporter was now doing a live broadcast, describing the scene as an unprecedented gathering around one of Britain's most dedicated royal guards. She interviewed tourists from different countries, all expressing amazement at Marcus's ability to remain motionless despite the chaos around him. Sergeant Thompson had given up trying to control his recruits. Many of them were now sitting on the ground, treating the whole thing like an outdoor classroom. They were taking notes about Marcus's technique, discussing his breathing patterns, and debating whether they could ever achieve such discipline. Marcus felt a bead of sweat roll down his forehead, but he could not wipe it away. The salt stung his eyes, but he forced himself to keep them open and focused straight ahead. Every muscle in his body was screaming for movement, but his pride and training kept him frozen. A small crisis erupted when two tourists got into an argument over who had the right to stand in a particular spot for photos. Their voices rose above the general noise, and for a moment, Marcus worried that a fight might break out right next to him. Palace security quickly stepped in to separate them, but the incident showed how tense the situation had become. The crowd was now so large that it was blocking the sidewalk and spilling into the street. Cars had to drive around the gathering, and some drivers were honking their horns in frustration. A few police officers arrived to direct traffic, but they seemed unsure about how to handle the crowd itself. Marcus noticed that his breathing had become shallow and rapid. The combination of stress, heat, and the pressure of maintaining his position was taking its toll. He tried to slow his breathing without making it obvious, but he knew that experienced observers in the crowd might notice his distress. A young recruit approached Sergeant Thompson with a worried expression. "Sir, should someone help him? He looks like he might be in trouble." The sergeant looked at Marcus carefully and saw the signs of strain that the recruit had noticed. For the first time, he began to consider that this situation might be genuinely dangerous. The temperature was rising as the day progressed, and Marcus's heavy uniform was becoming unbearably hot. He could feel moisture building up inside his boots, and his hands were getting slippery inside his white gloves. The physical discomfort was adding to his mental stress. A group of tourists had started a betting pool on how long Marcus could continue standing without moving. They were loudly discussing the odds and placing bets, treating his suffering like entertainment. Marcus felt humiliated but could do nothing to stop them. The news crew had set up additional cameras to capture different angles of the scene. The reporter was now describing it as a testament to British discipline and dedication, not realizing that the guard she was praising was actually in distress. Her broadcast was being picked up by other news stations, making the situation even more public. Marcus began to feel dizzy. The combination of dehydration, heat, and stress was affecting his ability to concentrate. He tried to focus on a fixed point in the distance, a technique he had learned in training, but the constant movement of people around him made it difficult. Sergeant Thompson finally decided he had to act. He began pushing through the crowd more aggressively, shouting orders for people to move back. But his efforts were too little, too late. The crowd had taken on a life of its own, and individual voices of authority were being drowned out by the collective excitement. A paramedic who happened to be passing by noticed the situation and approached one of the police officers. "That guard doesn't look well," she said, pointing at Marcus. "Someone should check on him." The officer looked at Marcus and saw what the paramedic meant, but getting through the crowd to reach him seemed impossible. Marcus could hear fragments of conversations around him. How long has he been standing there? "Is this normal? Should someone call for help?" He wanted to answer their questions, to tell them that this was definitely not normal, but he remained silent and still. The crowd had become so dense that people in the back were complaining they could not see anything. Some had climbed onto nearby benches and walls, turning the area into a chaotic viewing gallery. The situation was now completely beyond anyone's control. Marcus realized that his 15 years of training had not prepared him for this moment. He had learned to face armed criminals, to protect against terrorist threats and to maintain discipline under pressure. But no one had taught him how to handle being overwhelmed by kindness and curiosity. Just when Marcus thought the situation could not get any worse, he heard a commotion from the direction of the palace. People in the crowd began turning their heads and whispering excitedly. Someone important was approaching, and the news was spreading quickly through the gathering. "It's Prince George," someone shouted from the back of the crowd. The announcement sent a wave of excitement through the people, and everyone began pushing forward to get a better look. Marcus felt the crowd pressing even closer to him, making it even harder to breathe. Prince George, now 25 years old and known for his down-to-earth personality, had been inside the palace when his staff informed him about the unusual situation at the gates. Curious and concerned, he had decided to see what was happening for himself. As the prince approached, the crowd began to part, but very slowly. People were reluctant to move away from their good viewing spots, and many were trying to take photos of the prince while still keeping an eye on Marcus. The result was a chaotic shuffling of bodies that made the situation even more crowded. Marcus could see the prince approaching through the gaps in the crowd. He felt a mixture of relief and embarrassment. Relief because someone with real authority was finally here, but embarrassment because the prince was seeing him in this undignified situation, trapped like an animal in a zoo. Prince George was accompanied by 2 palace guards, but even they were having trouble moving through the dense crowd. The prince seemed calm and patient, stopping to speak with some of the people and gently asking them to step back. His polite approach was working better than the more aggressive tactics others had tried. "Ladies and gentlemen," Prince George called out in a clear, friendly voice, "I understand you're all interested in meeting our royal guard, but I'm afraid you're making his job rather difficult." His words carried the weight of royal authority, but delivered with such kindness that people began to listen. The news reporter immediately turned her attention to the prince, shoving her microphone toward him. "Your Royal Highness, can you comment on this unusual situation?" she asked breathlessly. Prince George smiled politely but gestured for her to step back with the others. As the prince got closer to Marcus, he could see the strain on the guard's face. Despite Marcus's best efforts to hide it, Prince George recognized the signs of someone who was in serious trouble. The guard's skin was pale except for red spots on his cheeks, and there was a slight tremor in his hands. "Everyone, please step back immediately," Prince George said, his voice becoming more serious. "This man needs space and air." The royal command had an immediate effect. People began moving away from Marcus, creating a small circle of clear space around him for the first time in hours. Prince George approached Marcus directly. "Guard, are you all right?" he asked quietly, so only Marcus could hear. Marcus wanted to answer, wanted to explain everything that had happened, but his training required him to remain silent and motionless unless directly ordered otherwise. Seeing that Marcus was unable to respond while maintaining his duty, Prince George understood the problem immediately. He had grown up around royal guards and knew their strict protocols. He realized that Marcus was trapped by his own sense of duty and training. "Sergeant Thompson," Prince George called to the training instructor, who quickly pushed through the crowd to reach them. "What exactly is happening here?" The sergeant explained about the training session that had gotten out of control, apologizing profusely for the situation. Prince George listened carefully, then looked back at Marcus with concern. He could see that the guard was struggling physically and mentally. The prince knew he had to act quickly before the situation became dangerous for Marcus's health. "How long has he been standing there?" Prince George asked. Sergeant Thompson checked his watch and replied, "About 4 hours now, Your Highness, 3 of them surrounded by this crowd." The prince's expression became more serious as he realized the severity of the situation. The crowd was still watching, eagerly, many people holding up phones to record this unprecedented interaction between a prince and a royal guard. The news cameras were rolling, capturing every moment of what was becoming a very public rescue. Prince George turned to address the crowd again. "I want to thank all of you for your interest in our royal guards. They are indeed remarkable people who serve our country with great dedication. However, this gentleman needs our help right now, and I'm asking all of you to please move back to the street." Most people began to comply with the prince's request, but some were stubborn. not wanting to miss any part of this unusual event. Prince George gestured to the palace guards who had come with him, and they began gently but firmly moving the remaining onlookers away from Marcus. As the space around Marcus cleared, Prince George could see the full extent of the guards' distress. Marcus was swaying slightly. His face was covered in sweat and his breathing was obviously labored. The prince realized that immediate action was needed. "Guard," Prince George said formally, using the proper protocol. "You are relieved of your current post. That is a direct order from Prince George." These words were exactly what Marcus needed to hear, the only words that could free him from his self-imposed prison of duty. The moment Prince George gave the order, Marcus felt his entire body relax. His shoulders sagged, his rigid posture melted away, and he took his first deep breath in hours. But the sudden release of tension was too much for his exhausted body, and he began to sway dangerously. Prince George reacted instantly as he saw Marcus beginning to collapse. The prince stepped forward and caught Marcus by the arm, steadying him before he could fall. The crowd gasped collectively, witnessing something they had never seen before: a member of the royal family personally helping a guard in distress. "Easy there," Prince George said gently, supporting Marcus's weight. "You've been standing there for hours. Let's get you somewhere you can sit down and recover." His voice was filled with genuine concern, treating Marcus not as a servant, but as a fellow human being who needed help. The paramedic who had noticed Marcus's condition earlier pushed through the remaining crowd. "Your Highness, I'm a paramedic. May I check on him?" she asked. Prince George immediately nodded and helped guide Marcus to a nearby bench that palace staff had quickly brought over. Marcus felt embarrassed as he sat down heavily on the bench. In all his years of service, he had never needed to be rescued, especially not by a member of the royal family. "I'm sorry, Your Highness," he managed to say, his voice hoarse from not speaking for hours. "This has never happened before." "Nonsense," Prince George replied firmly. "You have nothing to apologize for. What happened here was extraordinary, and you handled it with remarkable dignity. I doubt many people could have maintained their composure under such circumstances." His words were sincere and meant to comfort the exhausted guard. The paramedic quickly assessed Marcus's condition. She checked his pulse, which was rapid but strong, and examined his eyes for signs of serious dehydration or heat exhaustion. "He needs water immediately and should rest in a cool place," she announced. "He's suffering from mild heat exhaustion and dehydration." Prince George personally handed Marcus a bottle of water that one of his guards had brought. "Drink slowly," he advised, watching as Marcus gratefully accepted the water. The simple act of the prince serving the guard was not lost on the crowd, who watched in respectful silence. As Marcus sipped the water, he began to feel more human again. The relief of being able to move, to sit, to drink was overwhelming. He looked up at Prince George with gratitude. "Thank you, Your Highness. I thought I was going to have to stand there until someone in authority told me otherwise." "That's exactly what makes you such an excellent guard," Prince George said with a smile. "Your dedication to duty is admirable, but sometimes common sense must override protocol." Today was one of those times. He sat down on the bench next to Marcus, surprising everyone with his informal approach. The news reporter, who had been documenting everything, approached cautiously. "Your Highness, could you explain what just happened here?" she asked. Prince George looked at her thoughtfully before responding. "What you witnessed today was a perfect example of why our royal guards are so special," Prince George began. "This man stood at his post for hours under increasingly difficult circumstances, because his sense of duty would not allow him to abandon his position. That level of dedication is extraordinary," the prince continued. "However, what you also saw was the importance of looking out for one another. When duty conflicts with human welfare, we must choose humanity. That's what I hope people remember from today's events." His words turned the chaotic incident into a teachable moment. Sergeant Thompson approached the bench, looking mortified. "Your Highness, I take full responsibility for this situation. The training session got completely out of hand, and I failed to protect my colleague here." His voice was filled with genuine regret for what had happened. Prince George stood up and placed a hand on the sergeant's shoulder. "Sergeant, no one could have predicted this situation. Sometimes things spiral beyond our control despite our best intentions. What matters is how we respond when that happens." His forgiveness was immediate and complete. Marcus was beginning to feel better as the water and rest took effect. The color was returning to his face and his breathing had normalized. He looked around at the scene, the dispersing crowd, the news cameras, the prince sitting beside him on a simple bench, and realized how surreal the whole situation was. "Your Highness," Marcus said quietly, "I need to return to my post. My shift doesn't end for another 4 hours." Even after everything that had happened, his first instinct was to return to duty. This statement made Prince George smile and shake his head in amazement. "Marcus," Prince George said, using the guard's first name for the first time, "you're not returning to that post today. In fact, I have a different assignment for you." The prince's tone suggested that something important was about to happen. The crowd, which had been slowly dispersing, began to gather again when they heard Prince George speaking. They sensed that something significant was about to occur and they did not want to miss it. Even the news reporter moved closer with her camera crew. "Marcus Wellington," Prince George said formally, standing up and facing the guard, "your dedication and professionalism today have been exemplary. You have shown exactly the kind of character and commitment that we value in our royal protection staff." His voice carried the weight of official ceremony. Marcus struggled to stand up, still weak but determined to show proper respect. Prince George gestured for him to remain seated. "No, please stay seated. You've done enough standing for one day." The prince's humor brought smiles to the faces of those watching. "Therefore," Prince George continued, "I am appointing you as one of my personal bodyguards, effective immediately. Your new assignment will be to accompany me on my official duties and help ensure my safety during public appearances." The announcement sent a murmur of excitement through the watching crowd. Marcus was stunned. In all his years of service, he had never imagined such an honor. Personal bodyguards to members of the royal family were elite positions, usually given only to guards with special training and many years of distinguished service. To be chosen like this after what felt like a failure was beyond his comprehension. Marcus looked up at Prince George with disbelief and gratitude shining in his eyes. "Your Highness, I don't know what to say." "Are you certain? After what happened today, I would understand if you thought I wasn't suitable for such an important position." His voice trembled with emotion and exhaustion. Prince George smiled warmly and knelt down so he was at eye level with Marcus. "What happened today showed me exactly why you are perfect for this role. You demonstrated unwavering loyalty, incredible self-discipline, and absolute dedication to your duty, even when it became physically and mentally challenging. Those are exactly the qualities I need in someone who will protect my life." The crowd had grown quiet, sensing the importance of this moment. Even the news reporter had stopped asking questions, simply letting her cameras record this unprecedented scene of a prince personally recruiting a guard who had just been rescued from an overwhelming situation. "But Your Highness," Marcus said, still struggling to accept what was happening, "I was trapped by a crowd of tourists and recruits. I couldn't even protect myself, let alone protect you." His honest self-assessment showed both humility and the high standards he held himself to. Prince George stood up and addressed not just Marcus, but the entire crowd that was listening. What Marcus experienced today was not a failure of protection. It was the result of his success. People were drawn to him because they could see his professionalism, his dedication, and his character. The problem was not with Marcus, but with a situation that spiraled beyond anyone's control. The prince continued, his voice growing stronger and more official. "A bodyguard's job is not just to fight off attackers or handle obvious threats. Sometimes the most dangerous situations are the ones that seem harmless at first, like an enthusiastic crowd that grows too large, or a public event that attracts more attention than expected. Today Marcus showed me how he handles pressure, and I was very impressed." Sergeant Thompson stepped forward with tears in his eyes. "Your Highness, if I may say so, you could not have chosen a better man. I've known Marcus for years, and his integrity and dedication are beyond question. He will serve you well." The sergeant's endorsement carried weight, coming from someone who had trained hundreds of guards. The paramedic finished checking Marcus's vital signs and nodded approvingly. "He's recovering well. With some rest and proper hydration, he'll be back to full strength by tomorrow." She packed up her medical kit, satisfied that Marcus was no longer in any danger. Prince George helped Marcus stand up slowly. "Come on, let's get you inside where it's cooler." We have a lot to discuss about your new role, but first you need to rest and recover completely. His care for Marcus's well-being was evident to everyone watching. As they walked toward the palace entrance, the crowd burst into spontaneous applause. What had started as a chaotic situation had ended with a remarkable demonstration of leadership, compassion, and recognition of true character. The recruits who had unknowingly caused the problem were now witnesses to an extraordinary example of how real leadership works. The news reporter summarized the events for her viewers. What we witnessed here today was truly extraordinary. A routine training session became a crisis, which was then transformed into a moment of genuine leadership and human kindness. Prince George not only rescued a guard in distress but recognized his true value and elevated him to one of the most prestigious positions in royal security. Marcus walked slowly beside Prince George, still feeling weak but filled with a new sense of purpose. As they entered the palace, he turned back for one last look at the crowd that had changed his life. The tourists, the recruits, the reporters, they had all played a part in what had become the most important day of his career. "Your Highness," Marcus said as they reached the cool interior of the palace, "I promise you will never regret this decision. I will protect you with my life, just as I was prepared to maintain my post today regardless of the personal cost." His voice was steady and filled with determination. Prince George stopped and looked at Marcus seriously. "I know you will, Marcus, but I also want you to remember today's lesson. Sometimes protecting someone means knowing when to ask for help, when to change tactics, and when to put human welfare above rigid protocol. A good bodyguard protects not just my physical safety, but helps me make decisions that keep everyone safe and secure." Over the following weeks, Marcus began his new role as Prince George's personal bodyguard. He accompanied the prince to official events, charity functions, and public appearances. The story of how he was chosen had spread throughout the Royal Protection Service, making him something of a legend among his colleagues. Marcus never forgot the day he was surrounded by recruits and rescued by the prince he now protected. It reminded him that sometimes the most unexpected situations can lead to the most extraordinary opportunities. His 15 years of faithful service had prepared him for this moment, even though he never could have imagined how it would come about. The recruits who had unknowingly created the crisis became some of Marcus's biggest supporters. They often pointed him out to new trainees, telling the story of the guard who was so dedicated that a prince personally chose him as a bodyguard. Marcus had become not just a protector, but an inspiration to future generations of royal guards. Years later, whenever Prince George told the story of how he chose his most trusted bodyguard, he would always end with the same lesson. True character is revealed not in comfortable circumstances, but in moments of unexpected challenge. Marcus showed me his character that day, and it was exactly what I needed in someone I would trust with my life.